It's a chilly November morning in the Austrian Alps. A truck driver pulls into a lonely roadside parking area near the village of Searle. He steps out into the misty air and freezes. Just beyond the guardrail, tangled in the brush of a steep ravine, lies a man's body. The victim's clothing is soaked dark with blood. He's been riddled with bullets. This is no accident or hiking mishap. It looks like an execution. In a place known for ski holidays and postcard scenery, a brutal crime scene is unfolding. Who is this man? Who would carry out such a cold-blooded killing on a quiet mountainside? Investigators soon discover a cryptic clue on the body, one that will unravel a twisted tale of love, betrayal, and murder. It's Monday, November 7th, 2016. Searle is a picturesque municipality in Tyrol, Western Austria, a small Alpine village of just over 3,000 people, nestled in a valley below the Wilder Kaiser mountain range. Tourists know Searle for its ski slopes and hiking trails. Locals know everyone by first name. Serious crime is almost unheard of in these parts, which makes the discovery that morning all the more shocking. Just after dawn, at a pull-off on the Eibergstrasse, a rural highway outside Searle, a truck driver notices something out of place behind the metal guardrail. Curious, he moves closer and peers over, and that's when he sees the lifeless body. He immediately calls the police. Local Tyrolean officers arrive quickly and secure the scene, joined soon by forensic experts from the state police. The location, known as Steinerne Stiege, is a small parking bay with a dramatic drop. Only a few steps beyond the railing, the ground plunges into the Eibergklamm Gorge, a 70 to 150 metre, nearly 500 foot, deep chasm. It's a foggy, cold morning. Patches of old snow lie on the ground, and a light drizzle slicks the pavement. Investigators carefully descend a short way into the ravine. The body is caught in a tangle of branches just a few metres down. Had it fallen just a little further, it would have disappeared into the gorge entirely, likely forever. In fact, police at first suspect someone tried to toss the corpse into the abyss to hide it. If not for sheer luck, the body snagging on tree limbs, this crime might never have come to light. One seasoned detective later remarked it was a nearly perfect murder, foiled only by chance. The victim is a male, probably in his late 20s or early 30s. As forensic examiners photograph and measure the scene, they count multiple gunshot wounds. Later, an autopsy will reveal 10 bullets struck the man, 10. Most are in his back and head, clear signs of a brutal execution-style killing. Bullet casings litter the ground near where he must have been shot. This parking spot is isolated. No CCTV cameras, no nearby houses. It's the kind of quiet turnout hikers use to start a trail, or locals might stop at for a phone call. At night, it would be pitch dark. The forensic team collects the spent shell casings. From the count and caliber, they suspect a small caliber pistol, possibly a .22 caliber handgun, a Kleinkaliber Pistole as Austrian police call it. The number of shots, 10 rounds hitting their mark, suggests the shooter wanted to make absolutely sure the job was done. As officers carefully search the victim's clothes for ID, they find surprisingly little. There's no wallet, no phone, no papers. Was the victim robbed? Perhaps the killer removed identifying items. But one object is still on him, a car key. Just a single key in his pocket, attached to a rental car fob. This is the first big clue. Police on scene run the car's license number, inscribed on the key tag, and discover the vehicle is registered in Germany. The key belongs to a car with Bavarian plates. Immediately, Austrian authorities reach out to their counterparts across the border. Tyrol, after all, borders Bavaria. Searle is only about 20 kilometers from the German frontier. Cross-border movement is common, and criminals don't respect national lines. Within hours, a joint investigative effort is underway, involving the Tyrol State Criminal Office and the Munich police. Meanwhile, back in Seoul, word of the grim find spreads fast. In a village that typically deals with perhaps a bar fight or a drunk driving incident, a murder is big news. Locals swap theories at the bakery and the gas station. Some whisper about a possible mafia hit. After all, an execution in a remote spot has a whiff of organized crime. Others fear it could have been a random killer on the loose in the mountains. For a tight-knit community, the thought that a killer chose their peaceful hamlet as a dumping ground is deeply unsettling. The Tyrolean press dubbed the case the Seoul crime thriller, and speculation runs rampant about who the victim might be and what dark deeds led him to this end. Within a day, the Austrian and German police start to assemble the puzzle. The car key found on the body proves critical. Tracing it, they identify the car. It's a rental or vehicle registered to someone in the Munich area. Initially, this actually confuses investigators. Why? They assume that the car's owner and the victim are one and the same. It's a logical guess. The dead man had the key on him, so perhaps it's his car. This leads German police to an apartment in Ottobrunn, a suburban town just outside Munich. Ottobrunn is over 100 kilometers from Seoul. If the victim lived there, it means an international element to this homicide. A German-based person killed in Austria. Munich police secure a warrant and enter the Ottobrunn apartment tied to the car registration. Inside, they make a startling discovery: a handgun tucked away on the premises. Ballistic testing will later confirm it's the very murder weapon used in Seoul. Finding this gun so quickly is a huge break in the case, but it also deepens the mystery. If the victim is the car's owner, why would the murder weapon be found in his own home? As police are processing the apartment, a 28-year-old man arrives, Konstantinos Kostas P., a Greek national living in Ottobrunn. He tells the officers that the apartment is his, and presumably that the car is also his. In that moment, the investigation's picture flips upside down. The man they thought was a victim, the car's owner, is alive and standing in front of them, which means the dead man in Seoul is someone else. Konstantinos P. is promptly taken into custody. Faced with the evidence, his car key on a corpse, the gun in his home, he begins to talk. In fact, according to statements later given by officials, he confesses to the killing during police interviews. The detectives in Munich and Tyrol must have been floored by what they heard. The case, which had been a whodunit for barely 48 hours, now has an alleged perpetrator in hand, and he's volunteering details. But what could possibly be the motive? Why would a 28-year-old man from Munich drive a friend or acquaintance all the way to an Austrian parking lot and execute him? The answers, as they emerge, are shocking. At first, Konstantinos P.'s confession is somewhat cryptic. He claims that he did shoot the man in Seoul, 10 shots in fact, and that he did it for a reason. According to leaks from the interrogation, he says he killed to protect someone he cared about. The Austrian press would later call it a possible act of liberation. Investigators probe further, and a picture starts coming into focus. The victim, it turns out, was Konstantinos' close friend, almost like a brother. And the person Konstantinos wanted to protect was none other than the friend's wife. By November 8th and 9th, news outlets are reporting that the dead man has been identified as Antonios C., 31 years old, originally from Greece but living in Munich. He was indeed a friend of Konstantinos P., and in fact, all three, Antonios, his wife, and Konstantinos, were part of the same circle in Ottobrunn. Antonios was of Greek origin too, and had moved to Germany some years prior. Suddenly, this looks less like a random act or a gang hit and more like a personal drama that turned deadly. The Munich police, having gotten Konstantinos' confession, hand him over to Austrian custody as the crime happened on Austrian soil. A European arrest warrant is executed with impressive speed, one advantage of international cooperation in the EU, and by the second week of November, Konstantinos P. is sitting in a cell in Innsbruck, Austria, charged with murder. Tyrolean Chief Investigator Walter Pupp and Munich detective Markus Kraus hold a joint press conference on November 18, 2016, to update the public. They confirm that the man in custody, Konstantinos P., has confessed to shooting the victim and that the case is far from closed. because they believe he didn't act alone. Even as the investigation zeroed in on Konstantinos as the triggerman, another figure loomed in the background, the victim's wife. Let's introduce her, Alexandra M., 31 years old, a German citizen. She was Antonios' wife of several years and the mother of their young child. At the time of the murder, the couple had a 6-year-old daughter named Maria. By all accounts, the marriage of Antonios and Alexandra was deeply troubled. In fact, local media later revealed that by 2016, the marriage was essentially broken, only on paper. They had been sleeping in separate spaces, he on the bed, she on the couch, and the main bond keeping them under one roof was their little girl. When Austrian police first contact Alexandra in early November about her husband's death, her reaction raises eyebrows. According to investigators, Alexandra had been on the verge of reporting her husband missing, but oddly, hadn't actually filed the report. It seems she went to the police saying her husband was gone, but hesitated to complete the paperwork. That hesitation was enough to make detectives curious. Why hold off on reporting him missing if you're worried? When questioned, Alexandra drops a quiet bombshell. She admits she knew about the murder. In fact, she says she had known in advance that her friend Konstantinos planned to kill Antonios. This admission is shocking. It implies that the victim's own wife was aware of, and possibly complicit in, the plot to murder him. On November 13th, 2016, just 1 week after Antonios' body was found, Alexandra M. is arrested in Munich as a suspected accomplice in her husband's killing. Shortly thereafter, she too is transferred to Austria to join Konstantinos in Innsbruck's jail awaiting charges. The case has now taken on the shape of a conspiracy. A husband dead, his wife and his friend accused of orchestrating and carrying out his murder. The press, naturally, latch on to the sensational narrative, a deadly lover's pact between the widow and the friend-turned-killer. It's a story almost too dramatic to be true. Did these two lovers collude to eliminate the man who stood between them? With both suspects in custody, investigators piece together the motive behind the murder. And it turns out to be a tale as old as time. An illicit love affair and an allegedly abusive husband. But there are layers of complexity here that make this more than a simple, let's kill him so we can be together plot. Antonios C., the victim, and Alexandra M. had met and married in Greece years earlier. In fact, they lived on the island of Crete until 2013, when they decided to move to Germany. Perhaps they sought better job prospects, or a fresh start in Munich's large Greek expatriate community. They settled in Ottobrunn, Bavaria. Over the next few years, however, their marriage deteriorated. By 2014, Alexandra reportedly entered into an extramarital affair that lasted about a year. Antonios eventually discovered this infidelity in the spring of 2016. According to a man who claimed to be Alexandra's lover from that period, Antonios' discovery made an already bad marriage even worse. I can well imagine things got much worse between them after he found out. Knowing him, I believe he became violent. That ex-lover told an Austrian tabloid. Violence, in fact, is a key part of this story. Antonios was unemployed, and multiple reports indicate he had a history of domestic abuse. Alexandra was often beaten, and even their young daughter was not spared in the later stages. He had started tormenting the 6-year-old as well. These details emerged in court and through investigation. It painted a picture of a household living in fear. Friends of the family, one of whom was Konstantinos P., were aware of this alleged abuse. Konstantinos in particular had become a shoulder for Alexandra to lean on. Konstantinos P., aged 28 in 2016, was a cook by profession and a fellow Greek expatriate living in Ottobrunn. He met Alexandra through work. They were former co-workers at some point, which is how he became a friend to both her and Antonios. As Antonios' violence escalated, Konstantinos grew closer to Alexandra and the little girl. They spent more time together, and what started as friendship and support bloomed into something more. By mid-2016, Alexandra and Konstantinos had begun an affair. Her second affair, it seems, but this one felt different. They reportedly shared dreams of a new life together as a family, maybe starting fresh in Greece. In other words, Konstantinos fell deeply in love with Alexandra, and she with him, at least to some extent. But there was a huge obstacle to their future. Antonios, the husband. Alexandra confided in Konstantinos that she wanted to leave Antonios, but she was terrified of what he might do. One fear dominated her mind. If she tried to divorce him, Antonios might take their daughter and flee to Greece. The child, Maria, had only a Greek passport. Perhaps Antonios insisted on that. Alexandra, a German mother, feared that if Antonios ran with the girl to his homeland, she might never see her daughter again. This kind of custody panic can be paralyzing. By late 2016, Alexandra felt trapped in a violent marriage by the fear of losing her child if she left. Konstantinos, watching the woman he loved suffer, came up with a drastic solution. If Antonios was the problem, they needed to remove the problem. At some point, the two lovers began to discuss killing Antonios as the only way out. It's not clear who first floated the idea. Was it Alexandra, desperate and vengeful after years of abuse? Or Konstantinos, jealous and protective, wanting to play savior? In court, each would later blame the other for the genesis of the plan. What we do know is that by the late summer of 2016, plans were being laid for Antonios' murder. It wasn't a spontaneous crime of passion. It was meticulously premeditated over months. Investigators found evidence that Konstantinos and Alexandra conspired together to carry out this crime. They dubbed it a murder plot born of love. Their scheme had several parts: luring Antonios away from home, killing him quietly, disposing of the body, and then feigning ignorance. Even the murder weapon's choice was deliberate. The conspirators decided that a pistol would be the best method, quieter than a rifle, more reliable than a knife when facing a stronger man, and leaving a quicker, cleaner scene than something messy or loud. Konstantinos somehow acquired a small-caliber handgun, a Beretta pistol as later identified. He even went so far as to clean the gun with oil after the killing to wipe away any gunshot residue or fingerprints, a meticulous touch that shows he was thinking ahead. This wasn't a panicked act, it was an operation. Then there was the matter of where to do it. Committing the murder near their home in Munich was too risky. Too many neighbors, cameras, and investigators who might immediately suspect the friend or wife. They needed somewhere remote, where they could hide the body. Here, Konstantinos' familiarity with Austria came into play. Maybe he had traveled in Tyrol, or knew it was sparsely populated in areas. They went online and scoured maps for a suitable spot, settling on that isolated parking area by the Steinerne Stiege in Söll. It was perfect for their plan. A quiet stop off a less-traveled highway, next to a deep ravine where a body could be dumped out of sight. It was far enough from Munich that it wouldn't immediately scream domestic murder, the way it might if Antonios were found dead in his apartment or somewhere local. In other words, they were banking on the body not being found anytime soon, and even if found, not being easily identified or connected back to them. Finally, they planned how to get Antonios there without arousing suspicion. This fell to Konstantinos, who remained friendly with Antonios to the end, a betrayer with a smile. He concocted a ruse. Knowing Antonios was unemployed and likely eager for any opportunity, Konstantinos offered him a quick job. According to the prosecution, Konstantinos told Antonios that he had a lucrative side gig delivering something, perhaps a package or goods, to Austria, and invited Antonios to come along for easy cash. It was a story plausible enough to get Antonios to ride with him on Sunday, November 6th, 2016. After all, why wouldn't he trust his good friend on a road trip? They had shared drinks, dinners. Konstantinos was even like an uncle to Antonios' little girl by then. That Sunday, the two men set out from Munich in Konstantinos' car. Some accounts say it was a rental car he procured for the task, but it was paid for or registered in his name either way. One can imagine the drive through the Alps that day. Perhaps awkward small talk from Konstantinos, nerves building as each mile passed, Antonios possibly oblivious. Or maybe he sensed something off. but push the thought away. It's about an hour and a half to 2 hours drive to Searle. They likely crossed the German-Austrian border without incident. In 2016, there were still routine checks due to the migrant crisis, but nothing hindered them that we know of. They reached the Eibergstrasse and pulled into the desolate Steinerne Stiege lot under the cover of darkness that November evening. Thanks to Konstantinos P.'s eventual confession, as well as forensic evidence, we have a clear idea of how the ambush unfolded. It's after sunset on November 6th. There are no streetlights on this mountain road. Konstantinos stops the car in the tiny lot, perhaps saying he needs to stretch his legs or relieve himself after the drive. He coaxes Antonios out of the car. "Let's take a quick walk, get some fresh air." The air is cold and the woods around them silent. As Antonios steps away from the guardrail, Konstantinos makes his move. He pulls the pistol and aims at his friend. In the stillness, the first gunshot cracks out. Antonios is hit but not killed immediately. Perhaps the first bullet struck his torso. Startled and in pain, he tries to flee or at least take cover. He turns, maybe to run back toward the car or into the dark woods. Konstantinos keeps firing again and again into the dim shape of his friend. Bullets rip into Antonios' back as he tries to escape. 1, 2, 3. The shots keep coming. Antonios, critically wounded, falls to his knees. In a poignant moment described later in court, the dying man clings to Konstantinos' legs, kneeling, as if wordlessly asking why, or begging for mercy. But mercy is already far gone from this scene. Konstantinos steps up and fires the final shots at point-blank range. He puts 4 bullets into Antonios' head, executing him in cold blood. In total, 11 shots are fired, 10 hit their target. Only 1 errant bullet misses, disappearing into the night forest, likely the first or one of the first as Antonios moved. The brutality is astounding. Later, investigators would describe the scene as a veritable execution. Konstantinos himself would rationalize the overkill. "I gave him a bullet for every time he hurt his wife and daughter," he admitted, implying each shot was vengeance for an act of abuse. He claimed Alexandra had wanted it done symbolically. "She wanted it symbolic," he said, as if performing some twisted justice. Antonios collapses, lifeless. The quiet parking area now reeks of gunpowder. Perhaps a wisp of smoke rises from the pistol's barrel in the cold air. Konstantinos drags or pushes the body over to the guardrail and heaves it over the side, expecting it to tumble down into the 150-meter deep ravine. The body slides down, but only about 3 to 5 meters, getting caught in some scrubby trees just below the lip. Konstantinos likely doesn't notice it snagged so high up. It's dark, and he might assume gravity did its job. With the corpse seemingly disposed of, he picks up the empty shell casings if he can see them. He didn't get them all. Police later found several at the scene. Unbeknownst to him, he also left behind that crucial car key in Antonios' pocket, a small oversight that would unravel everything. Konstantinos gets back in the car and drives off into the darkness, leaving his best friend's body dangling in the brush above a gorge. One can only imagine what goes through his mind on that drive back to Munich. Adrenaline from the killing might be surging, or maybe a grim satisfaction that he had saved Alexandra. But he's not done yet. This was a 2-person plan. On the way home, or as soon as he's safely far from the crime scene, Konstantinos pulls out his phone. He composes a short text message to Alexandra. It reads, "Is Antonios sleeping?" This, according to prosecutors, was the pre-arranged code to confirm the deed was done. In other words, Antonios is now sleeping the eternal sleep. Alexandra receives this message on her phone back in Munich. Alexandra's reply, if any, hasn't been publicized, but we do know what she did next. She began to lay the groundwork to feign ignorance. The plan was likely for her to act like a worried wife when her husband didn't return. At some point after receiving Konstantinos' "Antonios is sleeping" text, Alexandra either calls a few of Antonios' friends or perhaps goes to the police station pretending to be concerned that her husband has gone missing. She likely tells a story that Antonios left to deliver a package with a friend and never came home. But here's where her nerves or conscience might have faltered. As mentioned earlier, she hesitated and never formally filed a missing person report. Perhaps the weight of what she'd set in motion was sinking in. It's one thing to plot a murder in secret. It's another to look police officers in the eye and lie about it. One way or another, her actions drew police suspicion even before Konstantinos fully gave her up. On paper, the plan seemed airtight. Kill the abuser in an isolated spot, get rid of the body, act like clueless witnesses after the fact, and live happily ever after. In reality, Murphy's Law, whatever can go wrong, will go wrong, made its mark on this scheme. First, the body didn't disappear as intended. Instead of lying at the bottom of a ravine hidden by snow and eventually washed away by spring floods, which is what likely would have happened, the corpse was found the very next day. That was sheer bad luck for the killers and sheer luck for justice. As we discussed, a couple more meters, and it might have been months or years, if ever, before Antonios' remains were found. The conspirators certainly didn't anticipate a random trucker peering over the railing at that precise spot less than 24 hours later. Second, that car key. It's almost poetic. The key to unlocking the whole mystery was literally a key. Konstantinos and Alexandra, in their careful planning, overlooked that Antonios might have the car key on him during the trip. Perhaps Antonios drove part of the way, or kept the key when they stepped out. When Konstantinos dumped the body, he didn't realize Antonios still had the key in his pocket. That tiny object connected the corpse in Zurl to an address in Munich within a day. From there, everything unraveled swiftly. Third, phone surveillance and texts. Once Konstantinos was a suspect, police did their due diligence and checked his communications. They quickly discovered the odd text message exchange with Alexandra around the time of the murder. The coded nature of "is he sleeping" may have been clever, but it wasn't exactly the hardest code to crack in context. Additionally, Austrian authorities put a wiretap on phone calls of the suspects, likely after Konstantinos' arrest when they suspected Alexandra too. In one recorded call not long after the murder, Konstantinos confesses to Alexandra, "I have a problem. There's an item I didn't get rid of." He's clearly referring to the gun, the murder weapon he failed to dispose of, which police found. Alexandra's response in that wiretapped call is telling. "I told you to make it disappear," she scolds, exasperated. That exchange is damning evidence. It shows she was not only aware of the plan, but actively instructing him on covering their tracks. This is not the demeanor of an innocent woman who just found out her friend killed her husband. This is a co-conspirator upset that her partner in crime made a mistake. Lastly, police interrogation tactics played a role. Initially, Konstantinos might have been trying to shoulder all the blame out of some misguided chivalry, protecting Alexandra out of love. But the Austrian and Munich detectives wisely played on his emotions. At one point, investigators hinted to Konstantinos that Alexandra might not have been faithful only to him. They suggested that he might have gone to these lengths for a woman who wasn't even truly loyal to him, implying Alexandra had other lovers or would move on to someone else. Whether this was true or just a tactic, it had its intended effect. Konstantinos, feeling betrayed or at least foolish, broke completely and provided further details implicating Alexandra. From that moment, he was done protecting her. The lovers' pact cracked under pressure. He spilled how she had been involved from the start, how she had encouraged him, helped plan, and expected to build a new life with him after Antonios was gone. By the time the case was handed over to prosecutors for trial, the narrative was clear. Alexandra M. and Konstantinos P. together plotted the murder of Antonios C. out of a mix of love and desperation, and Konstantinos executed the plan. Both were charged, he as the principal for murder, she for Beitrag zum Mord, participation in murder akin to being an accessory or co-perpetrator. In Austria, both offences are extremely serious. The law provides for up to life in prison for each of them. Alexandra's initial confession of knowledge, which she later retracted, and the phone evidence weighed heavily against her. The stage was set for a dramatic trial in Innsbruck. The trial took place in July 2017 at the Landesgericht Innsbruck, the regional court in Tyrol's capital. This was a jury trial, as is customary in Austria, for the gravest crimes. A panel of 8 jurors and 3 judges oversaw the case. The story had attracted significant media attention in both Austria and Germany. Reporters packed the courtroom to glimpse the 2 lovers at the center of this tragedy. Konstantinos P., now 29, appeared solemn and resigned. He had already confessed multiple times, and he continued to do so at trial. In a way, the trial for him was more about the why than the if. Why had he done this? On the stand, Konstantinos gave an emotionally charged account, admitting without hesitation that he pulled the trigger. In fact, he described in chilling detail how he committed the murder. He recounted luring Antonios under false pretenses and shooting him on that mountain, confirming the forensic findings of 10 shots hitting Antonios. Observers noted that he spoke of the crime almost matter-of-factly, but with an undercurrent of anger and perhaps twisted righteousness. When asked about motive, Konstantinos became impassioned. He insisted that Antonios's abuse of Alexandra and the child drove him to this extreme. In one memorable moment, he said in German, "I gave him a shot for every assault." He described how each bullet was, in his mind, payback for a beating or cruelty Antonios had inflicted on his family. He portrayed himself as a man who, out of wrongly understood love, became a murder weapon, essentially claiming he did it for Alexandra, out of love, however misguided. He seemed to hope for some sympathy, as if the jury might see him as a lover driven to protect a damsel in distress. However, Konstantinos' narrative also firmly implicated Alexandra. He stated that Alexandra not only knew about the plan, but actively wanted it. He claimed that she had played him a glorious world, enticing him with visions of a happy future together once her abusive husband was gone. In other words, he suggested Alexandra manipulated him, that she promised him love and a family if he would rid her of Antonios. This aligns with what investigators had hinted to him earlier. Whether or not Alexandra truly manipulated him to that extent, it was how he chose to frame it in his defense. "I was a fool in love, doing her bidding." Konstantinos' defense attorney, Georgios Vlachopoulos, echoed this theme in his opening statement. He basically said, everything the prosecutor says is true, a bold admission, unfortunately, and pleaded for mild punishment on the grounds that his client was merely an instrument of someone else. It was a strategy to acknowledge guilt, but paint Konstantinos as less morally culpable due to being blinded by love. Now to Alexandra M., sitting a few feet away in the same courtroom. The contrast could not be more stark. Here was a woman who in the eyes of the law had as much blood on her hands as the shooter, yet she was fighting to save herself. Alexandra had initially made partial admissions during the investigative phase. Remember, she told police she knew about the plan, and reportedly even said at one point, "I feel awful. I wish I could turn back time." But by the time of trial, she completely changed her tune. Now her stance was absolute denial of any involvement. She portrayed herself as an innocent victim of both her husband's abuse and her lover's unilateral actions. "I am not such a monster," she told the court. She vehemently denied that she ever wanted Antonios dead or that she encouraged Konstantinos to do it. According to Alexandra, the first time she learned her husband had been killed was after it happened. She claimed that when Konstantinos told her, presumably via that coded text or a later conversation, that he had killed Antonios, she was horrified and rebuked him. Her story was that she said something like, "Are you crazy? I just needed to go to a women's shelter." This is what her defense lawyer, Dr. Ursula Pernfuss, argued, that Alexandra never agreed to any murder plan and in fact protested when she found out, supposedly insisting that a refuge home for abused women was her solution, not violence. Pernfuss characterized Alexandra as a woman who went along with some of Konstantinos' talk or played along out of fear or confusion, but never truly signed off on murder. The recorded phone call where Alexandra told Konstantinos to get rid of the gun was, according to the defense, a game she was forced to play with her overzealous helper. Essentially, They tried to frame her as being dragged into this by Konstantinos' actions, rather than a willing mastermind. It really came down to her word against his, except for one thing. He had a lot of corroborating evidence on his side. The texts, the initial statements she made, the fact that she didn't warn anyone or try to stop it, whereas her version required believing that she just passively watched events unfold. The prosecutor, Hans-Jörg Meyer, hammered this home. He pointed out how Alexandra's behavior was not consistent with someone who accidentally learned of a murder. For instance, she didn't run to police upon supposedly hearing her friend killed her husband. Instead, she tried to fake a missing person report. And that recorded phone call. It sounded very much like two conspirators hashing out loose ends, not a shocked widow scolding a rogue vigilante. The prosecution cast Alexandra as the instigator, the one who commissioned the murder, even if she didn't pull the trigger. In their view, she used Konstantinos' infatuation to get him to do the dirty work, then hoped to walk away with clean hands. One detail the prosecutor highlighted was how Alexandra seemingly staged her reactions after the murder. He described her attempt to play the unknowing widow. She pretended to be worried when Antonios vanished, acting like she had no clue what happened, which Meyer argued was all part of the deceit. Only later, under pressure, did she crack and admit knowledge before retracting it. During the trial, both accused were actually blaming each other in a sense. Konstantinos saying, "I did it for her, she wanted it," and Alexandra saying, "He did it himself, I never asked for it." The irony is palpable. This supposed grand love affair, this pact between lovers, completely disintegrated under the harsh light of justice. Whatever affinity or loyalty they had was gone. It was each person for themselves. The jury had to determine the truth from this conflicting testimony and the evidence. It likely wasn't a difficult decision regarding Konstantinos. He himself pleaded guilty to murder. For Alexandra, the jurors had to decide if she was a co-perpetrator or not. After deliberation, the verdict came on July 12, 2017. Guilty on all counts. The court found that this was an insidious and planned murder carried out by a blinded henchman. The notion of Konstantinos as an instrument didn't absolve him. It just confirmed how manipulatively the crime was conceived, and the jury clearly did not buy Alexandra's Innocence Act. They concluded she was indeed an instigator and helper in the murder. When it came to sentencing, Austrian law gave the court options. For murder, life imprisonment is the maximum, and in a case this egregious, virtually an ambush assassination of an unsuspecting victim, a life term was on the table. For Alexandra's role, being an accomplice to murder can also technically carry life, but often the sentence is lower if the accomplice wasn't the triggerman. The judges and jury, in Austrian trials, the jury decides guilt and the panel decides the sentence, sometimes with jury input, delivered the following sentences. Konstantinos P. was given life in prison, and Alexandra M. was given 15 years in prison. To many, this felt like justice. Konstantinos had literally pulled the trigger 11 times, so a life term made sense. Alexandra, while not physically shooting, was deemed sufficiently complicit to merit a very long prison term, though not life. In Austria, life doesn't always mean natural life behind bars. In practice, a life sentence in Austria averages about 20 years served. There's the possibility of parole after 15 years if the person is deemed no longer a threat. So, life in Austria is not the absolute sentence it can be in, say, the United States. Still, it is the heaviest punishment available and signals the gravity of the crime. Alexandra's 15-year sentence indicates the court saw her as less culpable than Konstantinos, but still a planner of a heinous act. 15 years is a long sentence by Austrian standards for someone who didn't pull the trigger. It underlines that the court believed she did effectively order or encourage the murder. Her defense's portrayal of her as uninvolved fell flat. Both Alexandra and Konstantinos had the right to appeal, and news reports at the time noted that the verdicts were not yet legally binding, meaning appeals were likely. However, there's no public record of the appeals overturning anything significant. It's probable that by 2018, the convictions were upheld by a higher court, given the strength of evidence. As of the time of this recording in 2025, Konstantinos P. remains in prison, and Alexandra M. would have served about half her term. She might be eligible for release by the early 2030s, if not slightly earlier with good behaviour, but that remains to be seen. In the end, it's hard not to empathise with the daughter, Maria. At 6, old enough to remember these events, she likely heard the fights, perhaps even witnessed violence, then was told her father was dead and saw her mother handcuffed. It's a trauma that will need careful healing. Perhaps the only silver lining is that if Antonios truly was abusive, the cycle of abuse in that household is broken and the child is safe now. But the cost was tragically high. Thanks so much for listening. If you're interested in rarely heard solved global murder cases, consider giving us a follow. And if you're enjoying the podcast, we'd be thrilled if you would give us a 5-star rating on your favourite podcast app. It really helps us a lot. See you next time.